Hi there. My channel is focused mostly on the Game of Thrones Westeros franchise, but I'm intrigued by the newest TV installment in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Agatha All Along, particularly because it's supposed to be the first example of the new, reformed behind the scenes model for Marvel TV shows. That they were in a bit of a slump for a while and acknowledged this and set a plan to fix everything. So I'm interested in behind the scenes productions dynamics like that, and what can we learn from this for the nascent world of Westeros cinematic universe that they want to have more than one Westeros show going at the same time. Well, throughout this, I'm really just referring to one really great article that was in Hollywood Reporter back in October of 2023, explaining everything that happened. Link that below. And it's really four core points in all of this. Why so long ago? Because you understand that there are production cycles, that things being produced last year are the things we're seeing now. Things affected by the strike are things coming out this year. But even before that, the Marvel Cinematic Universe TV shows started out really strong with WandaVision, Falcon Winter Soldier, Loki Season 1. Then they churned out more stuff, and gradually there were problems. And it wasn't one TV show, it was problems in multiple fronts, culminating in Secret Invasion, but there were problems before that with She-Hulk and all sorts of other things. She-Hulk was finally the straw that broke the camel's back, or more, it came to a head, a ton of problems on that, which came out last summer of 2023, even though, according to the article, it was filmed almost a year in advance because it got delayed a lot. So there was all these problems, a lot of arguments in early 2023, so that by fall of 23, they had already decided on, okay, this is the reforms we're going to put in place to make sure this doesn't happen again and make sure we have a better foundation moving forward. And that was almost 12 months ago. Now, allegedly, we're going to start seeing the fruits of these reforms. Let's see how they do. Well, they said that technically the first full thing under the revamped model is going to be Daredevil Born Again next spring. But keeping up with interviews and stuff, they said a lot of these things Agatha All Along did benefit from. The advanced reviews are saying it's pretty good, and you can tell that they were implementing the specific reforms that they laid out in the article. So what were these 4 points? I'm keeping this short, just focused on, how do you fix and coordinate cinematic universes like that? Well, this isn't really comparable to the Westeros stuff, but overall the problem was that they treated the TV shows as supplements to the films, rather than running them like TV shows. Even if they were big budget, like She-Hulk had the same budget as House of the Dragon because of all the CGI overruns. Now these were, slick, well-produced. It's just the organizational model wasn't what they needed to do. That's the overriding thing for all 4 points. That point 1 of 4 is they didn't even have showrunners as such. They had head writers, but they could be replaced very easily by the film executives, and like Secret Invasion, they replaced them 3 times or something. That in movies, in the movie system, it's the director and executives who have power. The writer has very little power on theatrical releases. In TV, the opposite is true, where the showrunner is the head writer. So they are in charge of all the production aspects, everything goes up to them, and they coordinate everything. And there are specific extra tasks that a showrunner does in terms of organization and planning that a head writer doesn't. Instead, they just had the film executives drop in and occasionally order things around. And notice I say film executives. They didn't even have an executive dedicated to the TV shows. That it was just a supplement, and they'd come out to the TV studio, make some changes, come back. That's just a failure of coordination. And all the other points are tied into that. Point 2, they didn't have pilot episodes or series Bibles planning things out in advance. There wasn't the advanced planning that a showrunner usually does. Not every show has a pilot episode, but we break a season before we actually film. Breaking it is when you plan it down to the scene level, not the dialogue level. They have series Bibles, all of that. They skipped that. And why did they think they could function like this? Well, that's point 3 of 4. They really had this fix-it-in-post mentality that we don't need to pre-plan because any problems we can fix with reshoots after the fact. And that does work for movies, but a TV series just inherently can't function like that due to the differences between TV and film, that the size difference, the length, that they're just too long to go back and do that. If you're trying to fix a 2-hour movie with reshoots, you might be able to do that, but a TV show with 8 hours of content, it's just, you can't just retroactively fix things anymore. That part of being a TV show is figuring that out, and TV shows aren't really meant to be binged the way Netflix thought TV would move, that they're meant to be episodic and viewed, and thankfully most of the streamers shifted back to the one episode a week release cycle, because it builds momentum. Look how well WandaVision built up momentum 1 week at a time, and all the other Marvel shows. Thankfully, even from the beginning with Mandalorian and stuff, Disney didn't want to use the binge model. But the issue is that a lot of their series, the later ones, didn't feel like these are episodes you watch once a week. They felt like they were meant to be binged, or they weren't paced the way a TV show is. They felt like long-form movies that got chopped up into episodes. Even when, okay, like WandaVision, Winter Soldier, Loki managed to decently fit in the episodic model. That wasn't always the case. They didn't feel like TV episodes. That's a hard way to put it, but true. So, you didn't have a showrunner. They weren't making series Bibles in advance, and then they thought, oh, we can fix everything later. And with the amount of time involved, the amount of hours you're filming, you can't really do that. And that's one of the things they actually learned on She-Hulk, that these reforms were building for a while, that as mixed as She-Hulk was, from the article, everyone involved agrees, originally it was worse. And then, whereas we normally just slap some reshoots in there, it was actually unusual for them to call back the head writer to do her own reshoots. Normally it's the Marvel execs who are playing in someone else's sandbox anyway, going, oh, I can fix what someone else did, versus the person who created it actually smoothing out what they see as flaws is the way TV is supposed to be run. So everyone from that writer, Gao, to the Marvel people say, we really learned our lesson, that compared to the raw cut that only they saw in private to what came out, they said, this taught us that we're supposed to have a dedicated showrunner actually doing these things. So that was late in the churning out Marvel stuff run, so this is part of their learning curve by 2023. And of course this ties into the final point, point 4. They really just made one-shot, one-season, limited-run shows as supplements to the movies, and it's, oh no, it's part of one of the greater meta show known as the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Well, TV shows generally need more than one season to build up really good story arcs, or much less for the writers and crew and actors to really get a feel for their roles, to grow into it and get experience. But purely from a writing perspective, if they're just one-shot seasons and long-form movies, that's one of the strengths of TV shows, that they have more than one season with these long-form arcs, like Sopranos, Succession, all sorts of other things, that they realized that was a mistake, and tied to that, I'm treating it as one big point, that they're just one-shot supplements to the movies. They didn't have a dedicated movie executive. They just had the film executives, as I said, would pop in, and their concept of reshoots wasn't make it a better TV show, it was reshoots to synchronize it with our current plans for the next movie, adding in the hooks and Easter eggs that will tie into whatever the next movie is, which weren't really concerned about improving the TV show as such, just improving the lore, or the hook for everything, and just this is meant to be a glorified trailer for something leading up to the crossover. So those are the four things they reformed. That now we have dedicated showrunners who plan it out in advance with series Bibles, that we're not leaning as heavily into we can fix it in post, but as the strike taught us the importance of live rewrites by empowering the writers, but pre-planning more than that, and that they are actually having a dedicated TV division. So from what I've heard from all the advanced reviews for Agatha all along, the spoiler-free one said, wow, these feel, it's hard to say, these feel like TV episodes, like individual TV episodes. It feels more TV than when it was basically a really long, cheaper movie as a miniseries. Now keep in mind, Agatha all along is not going to have multiple seasons. Well, it made sense the way they explained it. Well, we now conceive of it as WandaVision was season 1. This is part 2. It's a trilogy, with Agatha all along as part 2, and Vision will be part 3 of a trilogy concluding later. Which makes sense, for they're shifting perspective like that. And they'd say the real first test bed for this model in full will be Daredevil Born Again, because it's supposed to have more than one season, which was a major problem. But these are all the things they addressed in terms of there was too much executive meddling from the films, but it was that kind of disinterested meddling, where they weren't actually the movie executive. It's the film guys would drop in and try to synchronize some stuff. And Marvel actually has a ruling council of sorts that they call the Marvel Parliament. They're actually listed in the credits, and in the article they do say it's actually not as formal as it sounds. It's the core 6 executives who run most of Marvel stuff. Not Kevin Feige, but the executives next to him. They just go, we coordinate with each other on what are you guys planning? Well, this is what I'm planning on my side of things. Oh, and that sub-franchise over there, this is what we're doing. How's this going to lead into the next crossover? And they've loosely called it the Marvel Parliament. So, from these fixes, what can we learn for the world of Westeros cinematic universe? And a lot of it doesn't really apply. This is brief, just what can we do? Because pretty much every Westeros spin-off is set in a different time period. At least decades and sometimes centuries apart. I mean, one of the reasons I'm making this video also is because shout out, In Deep Geek asked me, what are they working on now? And I said 6 months ago I had all these plans for this is the world of Westeros cinematic universe, but now given all of the behind-the-scenes problems at Warner Discovery, all bets are off. And unless they have actively hired a writer and they say I'm working on it or actively filming it, I'm not resting on the edge of my seat for it, So what exactly are they planning there? And the other reason I'm interested in this is Warner Discovery has a shitload of behind-the-scenes problems right now, and I'm hoping that this is our Marvel Secret Invasion period, where these are mistakes we learn from about coordination, and much less the budget problems, of how do we move forward with everything. Because of the tensions between, well, this is what the showrunner Condell wanted to do, this is what Martin wanted to do, and just all of that, of how do you coordinate between the guys on top and the guy on the ground going, well, I need it to work as a TV show. So still, the current crop of spin-offs, the one you're already seeing trailers for, the next one is Dunk and Egg, which is set roughly between House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones itself. So this is 90 years before Game of Thrones and 80 years after House of the Dragon. There aren't even really many of the same locations. They don't really go to King's Landing that much. That it's very different, and there aren't really recurring characters in it, so you wouldn't need to coordinate that much, other than on a few basic, lore points and that kind of thing, but it's not like there will be a crossover. And unless, of course, Bloodraven travels through time, I'm face-palming here, unless, of course, Bloodraven travels through time through prophetic visions. But I digress. But the other two things that actually actively have writers on them are Targaryen Conquest with Mattson Tomlin, who works in the Batman movies. He's writing that. And maybe a Nymeria show, which that'll be hundreds of years ago. That's different. That's the ancient Rhoynar versus the Valyrian Dragon Lords. And even then, Targaryen Conquest is 100 to 130 years before House of the Dragon. They wouldn't overlap. locations would need to match up visually, but like, oh, I guess Vagar would be a recurring character, but you know what I mean, that they're not like the type of thing that has crossovers, and they might do a young Corlys animation thing, but that's young Corlys, and its animation is very different. Still, in terms of the core lore stuff of, what if House of the Dragon says one thing about core long-running lore stuff or prophecies, like the Song of Ice and Fire prophecy? What if, like, they fixate on the Daenerys part? I don't think they did this. Some people accuse they focused on the Daenerys part too much. Well, that's the part Daemon would be interested in. But what if they say something weird about it? That's just a matter of focus. What if the Targaryen Conquest show flat out contradicts something like that with something very, very different? Or if they have a different take on the continuity things and stuff. What I'm thinking of is how a problem on Game of Thrones is, if you notice, the geography around King's Landing is drastically inconsistent. This is because, and I side with them, the VFX guys explained this in the Season 8 Blu-ray commentary, and they basically said for years we begged the showrunners to give us a definitive map of what this place looks like. And they didn't keep track of it. Instead they said, I want it to be a flat plain that Tyrion is in now. No, now I want there to be epic mountain shots. And they're like, which is it? You have to be consistent with geographic features on the scale of the capital city has a mountain next to it or not. And in frustration, they decided, look, if they're not going to be consistent with their instructions, we don't feel beholden to fixing this, because they originated the problem, and we begged them to do it, to fix it. They didn't. This isn't on us, this is on them. Things like that, and, you know, with changing time, you can say, like, well, King's Landing looks a little different 80 years later by Duncan Egg and the slums of Flea Bottom. Oh, no, this is a street we never went down before. But certain, like, the architecture of the Red Keep has to remain pretty consistent. There's a different cathedral, though. The Great Sept of Baelor would be in there if they ever go there, so that would look different because it's a different building. That you expect the city to change appearance over time, but certain major landmarks will not change. Like, you know, Paris grows, but Notre Dame should, you know, like, from one century to the next, how much do, like, the Leaning Tower of Pisa or something, like, how much do those major things, or the Roman Colosseum, change? So just lore things like that, or can Targaryens be burned by fire or not? So I'm not saying that. Another big thing is when House of the Dragon Season 1 came out, a lot of people kept asking Ryan Condal, like, who's going to be the Kevin Feige figure coordinating this entire cinematic universe? Is it going to be you? And he said, guys, I don't think so, and it's too early to even ask that, because they hadn't even started filming Duncan Egg yet. Do we need our Kevin Feige figure, or James Gunn, now that James Gunn is doing that for DC? I think the answer is we don't need something on that level, but just as Marvel realized we can't just have the film guys drop in every now and again, the film executives dropping in on the TV guys to see how they're doing, was not effective. That what Marvel learned is they need to have a dedicated position as a TV executive who oversees and coordinates all the TV shows. Now, obviously, we're not going to have something on that scale for the Westeros franchise, but my point is, it doesn't need to be something high-ranking, like as high-ranking as James Gunn or something, but we do need an executive whose official position is as the liaison between the multiple showrunners, just making sure they're all on the same page, that this is just good planning. You need to coordinate more. These aren't exactly the problems House of the Dragon is having right now, that 90% of the problems we're having now are due to budget, that they cut our episodes the last minute, there was a writer's strike, they need physically more episodes, and there is some friction with the showrunner and the living author, which I hope is mostly due to budget cuts they didn't even want to do to the story, but we'll see how that goes. Just moving forward in terms of coordinating between the live-action stuff, the animated stuff they want to do. I mean, even just visually, they need to make sure everything matches up, and just major core things like you can't change major prophecies. Like, a Star Wars prequel can't invent... I mean, they could expand on the Chosen One prophecies and stuff. Maybe this isn't the first one, but because I do think it's cyclical, but you can't randomly completely alter that without even telling everyone else. You need to run it by them first. So we'll see what goes with that. given that we're in a fallow period now, I actually am going to follow the new shows coming in fall on my channel. That it's actually Marvel versus DC head-to-head this week, that we have Agatha All Along, and the first new DC Comics thing. Well, it's a Batman thing separate from the James Gunn verse. It's the Penguin. It's an advanced preview. It'll normally be on Sundays. That I realize, other big channels like Preston Jacobs, Red Team Review, they cover what happens to be big in the news for nerdy sci-fi fans. So I am going to try to cover Agatha All Along and Penguin because I'm watching them anyway. Normally I'll just make a tweet about it. I am seriously a short audio-only thing of just, instead of writing a forum post, let me read off the forum post for 5 minutes and call it a video. These are my generic thoughts on what the observing the field. For what are other things in the field of sci-fi fantasy shows up to now? What are they doing? It'll be Agatha All Along and Penguin. Later, I'm really looking forward to the Dune show, for example. But short, under 10-minute things. Yeah, I'm going to be following this. I might as well talk about it because there isn't much else in the news. But that is the big thing here with Agatha All Along, though, is they said this is the first example of these behind-the-scenes structural reforms that they wanted to do. And I'm looking forward to it.